Welcome to another episode of Audie Hotties. Today we are talking about a few different things, but we're starting off with kind of an introduction to our diagnosis process and reading off of some of our tests. And yeah, just kind of talking through what that was like in our experience and then reading about some other people's experience too.
Got some good stuff for you.
Yeah. Hotties. Yeah, welcome to the Audie Hottie podcast.
Here we are.
All right, let's go. Okay, so first we're gonna talk about kind of just what's going on in our lives lately.
Sounds good. Tell me, what's the catch up?
Oh, man, so let me tell you, it has been cold and I've been struggling with the winter pretty bad. I don't know if you have too, but my particular flavor of autism comes with a lot of difficulty with transitions, especially.
Yeah.
And especially temperature transitions.
Got it.
I actually have something called urticaria, which is basically like an allergy that's kind of an unknown thing, usually something environmental, and mine are to both cold and hot.
Interesting.
The hot I'm not 100% sure on because I get hives and my legs like itch to where my skin like wants to come off. Sometimes it's usually in the heat, but it's more so around like if I'm running or doing something that gets my internal body temperature up. And then my cold one is completely different. I get migraines if I get cold, like in my ear canals, is what it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even if it's like 60 degrees outside and there's a 50-degree wind, it can be enough to get into my ear canals, and then I get cold and get a migraine. So
sucks.
Yeah. So luckily I've learned really well how to manage it and like not let that happen unless I'm out somewhere and I forget a hat or some way to keep myself warm, and then I'm screwed once it starts.
No, I was gonna say it sounds like it takes a lot of preparation.
Yeah,
and executive function.
Yes, also not forgetting things, ADHD problems.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like it'd be really hard going into some really cold months.
Yeah. And the other part for me is like even in nice weather, I struggle with shower transitions.
Yeah.
The worst.
Yep.
And then on top of that, the temperature difference and the thought of getting cold to get hot to get cold again to get warm again, like in the process of taking a shower and getting clothes back on and all of that is like torture.
I completely relate. 100%. It's really fucking hard. Yeah.
And I mean, on top of that, just the darkness too. I'm sure everybody's struggling right now with that, and it's a universal thing, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, it surprises me every year in terms of how early the sun sets and how long the night is. I'm at the point now where when I get home from work, I have about 10 minutes of light left in the day and then down for the night.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, and for brains that are already like working on, I need every condition to be correct for me to be able to complete executive tasks.
Yeah.
Like the dishes or other things, like all of that gets left behind when it's dark. Plus it's cold, plus it's like uncomfortable in other ways. And then that all goes by the wayside for me.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense, especially like navigating as an autistic person and having like not only the transition of the whole season, but the transition of the temperature, the transition of the expectations, the transitions. It's just ever changing.
Yeah. So. And I don't know about for you with our each having dogs, but part of what's really helped me in this last year of getting more regulated, not that I'm perfectly regulated, but getting more regulated has been consistently going on walks.
Yeah.
I've been really good all summer about daily walks, at least a mile, if not, up to 3 miles. And since the cold and the dark, you said you have 10 minutes after you get home. Like, when do you go for a walk safely, like in the dark, even with a dog? It's just hard. And then if you don't have time in the morning to do it, it doesn't happen. And that like piece of regulation is just gone.
Yeah, and it's like what can I replace it with? And walking at the gym under fluorescent lights. It's quite different.
I didn't even think about the fluorescent lights, but yeah. Already the treadmill is rough. I don't know. With your pets, do you get the treadmill effect, like where you get off and you're still like
Oh
moving.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I get that so badly that
Yeah.
sometimes it's just not worth the actual treadmill walking. So I'm like, what? Like
No.
I am holding on for dear life while I treadmill.
Yeah, the balance issue is real, and just like I think it's transition, like
Mm,
transitioning from moving to being still. And I think that I've been thinking a lot about just different diagnoses that I have, and I feel like it really is the deficit of being able to
mm,
transition. I
yeah,
don't know.
that makes sense. I wouldn't have thought about that, but it's true. And in the transition, you're not getting the sensory feedback that you would be getting if you were walking outside. You're getting
Exactly.
different sensory feedback of the
Yeah.
same visuals, but a moving body,
Yep.
and our brains are already not connecting all those dots. So then we have a very confused nervous system.
Very confused, very overwhelmed, very like, what the fuck am I supposed to do?
Am I going or stopping?
What is happening?
But yeah, thank you for pointing those things out because that's not something I thought about in the use of a treadmill. Like I knew that it was not equivalent for me to walking outside,
Yeah.
but I never connected really like transitions and the fluorescence. Like that makes total sense. Mm,
Yeah, and the gym is like an overstimulating environment
mm,
and has a lot of people in it. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about environments lately, just with work and with like there's a lot of social activities right now.
yeah.
Um, we're recording this in December where there's a lot of holiday parties going on and even at
Birthdays.
like birthdays. But celebrating Lauren's birthday the other night, I was so jazzed to go, got there, had a lot of fun, and then in an instant, just almost started shutting down
Mm,
because of we went to Dave and Buster's. So it wasn't super crowded. It was more of like the fluorescent lights.
mm.
And I didn't have my glasses on, which really help with the astigmatism side of things.
And you said you also have two different depths of
I
vision,
do.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it helps with that too. And it was really hard to navigate that environment. And I was just like, okay, well,
Oh, you guys were introduced to Jules last time in my intro section. This is my dog Jules. Say hi, Jules.
hello.
Can you speak for us? Speak.
Oh my God, that scared me so
She has a very loud bark for being a 40-pound dog.
much.
Anyways, that's her. You met her last time. If you're listening and not watching, she's a wiry terrier mix that's like 40 pounds, and she looks kind of like Benji or Winn Dixie if you've seen either of those.
She looks totally like Winn-Dixie.
Yeah. Yeah. Has there been anything else with the winter that you've noticed?
Yes. Okay. So usually during the winter, I enter into seasonal depression.
Mhm.
It was very loud last year. Um, however, this year it really hasn't been as bad as normal, and
Wow.
bad meaning just low energy. It hasn't been low in the sense of like trying to understand why I am so low energy or why I don't want to socialize as much
Mm.
or feeling really bad about myself. I feel like that comes around every winter and actually every summer.
Mm.
I call those like my seasonal depression
Mm.
seasons. So this year, this winter in particular, I've noticed that with all sorts of education around navigating transitions and understanding autism more, I've actually felt relatively light. There's not a lot of self-judgment, as there has been before. I mean, there's been times in the winter where I go days without getting up out of bed, days without eating. Um, and this winter, it really hasn't happened. And I think it's come with a lot of education and understanding of self. So I
It's
have noticed
beautiful.
that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's surprising for sure. And we'll get into this a little bit more with this episode, but as someone who's thought that I've been clinically depressed
Mm.
and then understanding that I have autism, I mean, it's night and day with how I perceive that and then also how I navigate it. And I I don't have to be on antidepressants. Yeah, lowering expectations really contributes. So that's the winter time.
It's, little progresses, we know it's happening, but now you know why. And
Yeah,
yeah, that makes a big difference.
for sure. So thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of on a more of a serious topic, my therapy this week, which you're welcome to throw any therapy things into if you have anything fun. But um, this week I'm in somatic therapy right now. I just quit regular talk therapy, because I feel at some point it eventually like bottoms out for me and doesn't feel as useful anymore. And I've never tried somatic therapy before, so this is kind of a first for me. So far I really like it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the girl that does it is extremely perceptive. She definitely notices like every little like movement and stuff you do. She's like, what just happened there in your body? And you're like,
Oh,
oh God.
stop looking at me.
Um, but we did a little exercise where she got up in the room and went far away from me and then like turned her back to me so that it wasn't like looking at me. And she said, I'm gonna walk towards you and you tell me when to stop. We're just practicing where your body is comfortable with me being in the room. And it's practicing like being just aware of what your body is interested in and comfortable with and when to say like no to something because it's just something I don't know how to do.
Yeah.
So she walked a little bit towards me. She probably only made it like 5 feet, and I was like, "Okay, stop." And then
Wow.
she came back and was like, "Okay, so how did it feel to say stop?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Really weird."
Yeah.
I was like, "I don't know how to say stop." And she was like, "Well, what did you feel in your body that made you say stop?" And I was like, "I don't know, kind of like a tingling, like a tingling feeling from inside." That was just like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Okay, it's time. um,
Discomfort? Is that
yeah, maybe
discomfort
discomfort.
or I don't know, information input?
Yeah.
Huh.
I have
Fascinating.
yeah.
Oh my
I have
gosh.
pretty bad interospection, so that's the ability to sense what's going on inside your body. And so that's kind of what we're trying to connect a little more
Yeah.
is like my
Hard.
cognitive to the physical feelings.
Yeah.
Um, so that was really interesting, but what came from that was more interesting because she was like, this is a practice in recognizing what's happening and saying no, or saying this is a problem, or recognizing that that made me uncomfortable or something like that. So then she asked me to bring up like in your past, in your childhood, did you ever tell someone to stop when you were uncomfortable with something? And then what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I realized that I didn't really remember doing that,
Yeah.
but that kind of brought up like the thought of like empathy in my childhood and like not feeling like someone empathized with my desire to stop or my desire to like communicate what I was feeling. And so it was really hard because I realized that most of the adults in my life, I don't think had much empathy for me. And that translated into me not having much empathy for myself
Yeah.
and also tolerating a relationship with minimal empathy.
Yeah.
Where on the other hand, I experience hyper empathy myself. And it's like I can't understand how someone could not give someone that empathy feeling.
Yeah. When you say that empathy feeling, what specifically are you talking about? Are you talking about someone seeing that you need to express something and not facilitating that? Or do you see it as like them seeing that you're struggling and ignoring it?
Kind of the second one, and
Yeah.
also when I do communicate it, not taking that as a true thing, like not having empathy for what's happening
Okay.
in my body.
Yeah.
For example, like when I was a little kid in ice skating, I had one ice skating coach that I would tell, or I would start crying because I was so frustrated at something, and then she would misinterpret that as me being an emotional kid, and that is accurate, but also like just me being emotional for no reason, and then would be like, you don't need to cry about this. There's nothing to cry about. Go do the thing, or like stuff like that,
So
and
you were dismissed
dismiss.
for
Yeah,
having for feeling those feelings.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I didn't feel empathy from other people for them understanding my condition or like understanding that things were hard for me or
Yeah.
mm,
Do you feel like in turn that turned into maybe a little bit of self neglect and like not taking an interest in yourself and how you do things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely turned into too like me not being able to recognize um like my own feelings and then also have empathy for myself because I would just dismiss them also. You
Yeah.
say like that doesn't matter, like that's not that hard. Like why are you
Mm-hmm.
doing that? Making it a cognitive thing and not just dismissing the emotions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was fun in therapy this week.
So much
So
fun.
much fun.
Well, I'm really glad that you are with a different type of therapy. I love somatic therapy. I
Yeah.
think I've been with a therapist for about 7 months now who dabbles in somatic as well as some
Mm,
other forms of therapy. But I do feel like even just you describing what happened and how it like really had you check in with your body and how that's something that you struggle with. I mean, it's just such immediate feedback and input and processing right there on the spot, which I feel
yeah.
like is so important for neurodivergent individuals.
Yeah, because we can't do it for ourselves is the big thing.
No, and we have to learn.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like a lot of other things in my life that I like wish there was just someone that gave me a handbook or instructions or something
mhm.
to make it a little more clear. Same thing with what does this internal feeling do or say or what?
What does this mean? There are
Yes.
tears, but what the fuck am I
What?
feeling?
What? Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. That's like hard shit.
Yeah,
It's really hard.
definitely those big realizations.
Yeah.
Do we move on to our episode?
Sure.
So, like we said at the top of the episode, today we are talking about our diagnosis process and kind of what that looked like. I want to start off by redacting what age I was diagnosed at because I already messed it up again.
It's okay.
Anyways, looking at
Safe
my
space.
report, it was in 2022. So it's only been a couple of years officially diagnosed. My first test was in 2021, which I think is what sticks in my head. Because,
Yeah, makes
anyways,
sense.
so yeah, I'll kind of give you the rundown just of what my diagnosis process looked like.
Yeah.
So,
Feel free to share everything, anything. I'm excited to hear it.
um, so I found out that I for sure had autism through TikTok. Full circle moments.
We love the
I'm about to
self-diagnosing
be on
queen.
TikTok. Um, so during COVID, I started going on TikTok more regularly and I started seeing videos of other people with low support needs autism and them telling their stories. And I was just seeing all these people that I was like, oh my gosh, like that is me. Like, I have these same struggles. This is also very autistic of me, but I started making a list of every time I saw one of like what feature it was that they were talking about. So I had like a running list of like these are all the things that I've seen in videos that I'm like, that's me, that's me, that's me.
Oh, that's so interesting. I love the analyzing.
Yeah. And then I had a lot of not pro cons moments, but like pros for I should get tested because I probably have some,
Yeah.
or no, these are normal things about myself that I like don't think are autism.
Yeah. A
Um,
little bit of like internal ableism.
yes, yeah, because in all the way back to high school, I can remember being that person that said things like, "We're all a little bit autistic," and oh, everybody experiences that a little bit, and which I feel really shitty about now that I know, but like then we didn't know.
You're learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely had the picture in my head that you could only be autistic if you were high support needs and nonverbal and all these other big things. So that I didn't see people like me being diagnosed until TikTok. And that's really where that like showed up the most.
It's so interesting. So having like a big, um, just like an example of what autism could look like in
Yeah, and that
different
there were
bodies, different genders. I'm sure that
yeah,
played into it too.
oh definitely. Yeah, just seeing other people that I felt were like me.
Yeah.
And also validating a lot of those struggles. My parent is very medically non-believing. She doesn't go to the doctor like basically ever. I have to force her to go sometimes to be like, you're supposed to be getting these tests at certain ages, yada yada. And definitely has a kind of perspective of like kind of the same thing. Like, that's just normal for everybody, blah, blah, blah. Like, struggles are just struggles. You don't
Yeah.
need a diagnosis for that. It'll just make you worse to have a diagnosis, to have a label on it. Meanwhile, which I've pretty much convinced her if she watches this, that she's ADHD, big time, big time ADHD.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. So we're working on convincing her the rest of the way. Not that it really changes anything. I mean, she's, you know, in her 60s. It's not going to really change a lot, but
Yeah.
it's important for her to see that in her so that she can see it also in me in ways. Yeah, between that kind of like not believing in the medical system and like needing those kind of things and not seeing other people who looked like me who were diagnosed, those two kind of things were what kept me from exploring that further, even though I had early identified some of those issues in myself.
Yeah.
So finally, I eventually had a long enough list in my pros column.
The pros outweighed the cons.
Yes. And of course, I went through my insurance's page on finding somebody who was a neuropsychologist to do my testing. And there was somebody in Anchorage, which was like 60 minutes away, kind of a pain. And then there was somebody in my town in Wasilla. And so, of course, I was like, well, I'll just use the person that's here in my town. Big mistake. If I have any recommendation for finding your testing, it's go through whoever you're seeing for like counselor, someone else who's been diagnosed,
Yeah.
somebody who knows other neurodiverse people,
Yeah.
and get your referral through them because this was not the experience that I wanted.
Shoot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So my first testing was with a guy, and we did all the like what I thought was the standard testing. Went through a lot of the tests that looked like what I kind of expected, except that all the questionnaire type tests didn't ask any questions that felt like the questions that I'd seen on other, because of course I'd done the RADs and all the other ones and all the like spectrum pie chart one,
Sure.
all of that before.
All the ones that you found out about on TikTok
Yes.
and then continue to self-diagnose yourself. And...
Yes. Did I have a binder full of them before? Wait. Yes. Yeah, printed results
Awesome.
for each of the tests with my numbers and the reasoning for them, and then also along with my lists.
You went hard and you leaned very hard into this. That is so good. I love
in the
it.
retrospect, like realizing how autistic is great. So yeah, so I thought it sounded like all of that except for the questions. I didn't recognize any of the questions that felt like the same type of questioning, except that I did know that he did the ADHD testing. And then there was another long test that felt more like it was asking about like psychoses and stuff. Like it was like, I hear voices at times in blah blah blah. Yes, no, maybe.
I had this too.
Yeah. And so that one was on there, and that made me like kind of unsettled because I was like, what is he testing me for?
I know. My psychologist said that it was brought up as a way to like flag different things that could be comorbid or not.
Okay.
That's how he explained it, but I don't know why your psychologist decided to do it.
Yeah, I don't either. And I'll read a little bit into the testing too, but basically at the end, he was like, you just have anxiety and depression and you're a little worrier and there's nothing wrong with you besides the anxiety and depression. Like, go home. And it was also
red flags.
It was also interesting because the only interview of other people he did, which I don't know if you had interviews with
I actually didn't.
Yeah. Was he asked if he could talk to my mom. Okay. And I had told him in the interview about how I felt she was a medical non-believer, like didn't really think that was important, and would probably just tell him that. But like, oh, disclose. We're quirky, but she's normal. Kind of thing. Yeah. And what did he get out of it? Yeah, she maybe had some quirky things, but she's totally normal, had a normal childhood, blah, blah, blah.
Weird.
But he did not ask to interview my partner, who I had been living with for 3 years. 5 years at that point.
Right, because you weren't living with your mom at this time.
I'm a full-blown adult. I'm 30.
Well, full-blown adults do live with their parents sometimes.
That's true. But I didn't in fact live with mine until I got out of grad school, so I can't even talk. But no, at that time, I was not living with my mom. Sorry, guys, I'll roll that back. You live with your parents. No judgment.
I'm about to move back in with mine now. I'm just kidding. I fucking wish.
Pay for housing for me, please.
Please take me back.
So yeah, so my partner that I've been living with for this long time, he didn't ask to interview them.
Weird.
And so it's like, what were you trying to get out of it? Whether you're just trying to get confirmation of your confirmation bias that I didn't have it, I didn't struggles, blah blah blah.
I think that this is part of the deficits in the assessment process is it's treating you like a little child who is dependent on their mother. So, of course, when you are diagnosing a child, you do talk to their parent or caregiver and you do that intake, that interview. But at this point, it's inappropriate because she doesn't know your everyday function. And, but I do hear you saying that maybe he wanted to prove a point. So, especially since you disclosed that she was a little bit weary of things. So, weird.
Yeah. And I don't have a lot of memory of my childhood. That's been something that's always haunted me, and we talked about talking about that on a future episode.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to really self-report and say like, yeah, this happened to me in childhood, or I had struggles with XYZ. The only thing that I knew for sure, because it bugged the hell out of everyone around me, was in my ice skating tights, the little seam, the line at the end. It goes across.
I know
like,
exactly what you're talking about.
Instead of the top.
Yeah.
And I had to spend like 30 minutes or more every day repositioning it, putting my skate on, taking it off, repositioning it. It just like felt wrong in all the ways.
But you're not sensory seeking at all. You're not autistic. No. You're not rigid.
No.
You're normal. Gosh.
Yeah.
What a disservice to people in that community.
Wow. So I'm gonna read a little bit to you from it.
So
this is my first report with this guy. So I'll note that he wrote globally intact for a lot of things. Like their sentences are long, but he said like motor functioning. Mrs. Abernathy demonstrated intact graphomotor speed. And like just went like that through like information processing, attention and concentration, language functioning. Like it's basically just like copy paste, like do for each thing.
Yeah.
And he did of the testing that he did the ADHD rating scale, the Beck anxiety inventory, Beck depression inventory, the Brief A, which is an executive function test, but not the most common, I believe. A controlled oral word association test, the DKEFS, which is a trail making test, a personality assessment inventory, R-bands, a test of premorbid functioning.
You took the R-bands?
Neuropsychological status.
I don't know.
Really know what it's for.
Honestly, but... I have administered it as a speech therapist. What's it but for? I can't remember. Typical. It was with adults though, so I'm sure it had something to do with cognitive functioning.
Yeah. A recognition memory test, an adult intelligence scale, card sorting. Yeah, that was all of them on there. So if you notice, there's some missing things that we will talk about on my next one. But I took this test back to my counselor at the time, and well, technically it was a couples counselor at the time, and then my primary care doctor, and both of them read that list of tests and were like, he didn't even test you for autism.
That's what I was just gonna say. Where was where was that test?
So I don't have autism on the test that you didn't give me. Yeah.
That's bizarre.
It's very weird. So luckily both of them pointed that out because I didn't know anything at the time for what tests were supposed to be done. They all looked crazy, which I'm sure if you've had testing, you know that the testing feels crazy while you're in it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just give you little highlights here. Her social profile reflects that she's somewhat distant and withdrawn in personal relationships. She experiences maladaptive efforts to control anxiety and can be seen as a perfectionist.
Is this his perception of you?
Yes, he is
This is
writing all of this.
wild.
She has rigid behavioral patterns which she follows unyieldingly.
Isn't that autism right there? What the fuck?
And then in his summary,
It's summer.
in his summary, he put that Miss Abernathy described a pattern of typical development in early childhood with minimal social interactions and opportunities while growing up.
That's so funny. Because that's again
Her mother
autism.
her mother noted she easily made friends and engaged appropriately with others, even though I had limited social interactions, according to him.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. It's not condescending. It is. What is that word? Conflicting information?
conflicting. Yeah, it's definitely conflicting.
Conflicting is another word for it. I can't remember, but
She was observed to focus heavily on her perception of relationships and difficulty engaging in typical interactions.
autistic. Okay. So he clearly didn't know what different criteria were for
Right.
autism. Where did he get his degree from? I'm just kidding.
Right. He did say that I was impulsive, but grossly intact functioning. I have cognitive difficulties that are self-perpetuating and contribute to a narrative of abnormal development or behavior that is not consistently supported by her reported history. Does it sound like he's calling me crazy? Because it sounds like he's calling me crazy.
Well, and he's pointing out like a lack of interoception. Isn't that what it?
Interoception, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. And then the
autism.
last sentence is, although not at a level for full diagnosis, she experiences symptoms of an obsessive compulsive personality disorder, given her rigidity.
Okay, so here we are.
Slow clap for misdiagnosis.
Holy shit. But that tracks with the lack of research on autism and AFAB folks.
Yeah.
And being misdiagnosed left and right for psychological disorders, which I don't know. Is autism considered a psychological disorder?
I don't know, but probably in the DSM-5. All right, so we stand corrected in this moment. No, autism is not considered a psychological disorder. It's rather considered a developmental disorder that affects communication and behavior. And the DSM-5, it is categorized as a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Yeah, so I guess it's not taking in the entire picture, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And yeah, not that one is better than the other. It's just not having that clear picture of functioning or lack of something to work with. So,
Yeah. And then what bothered me afterwards, because of course I was disappointed. Like I knew what outcome I wanted at that point.
yeah.
But even if the outcome had been different, it was the way in which he went about it that made me feel icky.
Yeah.
Like just being basically told like you're imagining things, you're doing all these things on purpose and making this narrative and like it's just that you're so like, you know, making things up is what it felt like.
Yeah.
And that was really hard to take of the way it was done. I think I would have gone from there and just been like, well, I guess I don't have it if it hadn't been for my counselor and my primary care both saying the same thing of like, that's not even, he didn't rule it out.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had that support afterwards.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I found out later too that one of my friends at work, her son, I think he was like 5 or 6. I could be totally wrong on that, but it was somewhere in that age. And he already had a diagnosis of autism given to him early, like 2, 3. And they were going back to get double checked for ADHD now that he was in school age. And they went to this guy before I knew that they were going to this guy. So it wasn't like I was like, yeah, go to him.
Right.
It was just
giving out referrals. Yeah. I wonder why.
It was just a weird coincidence that she happened to also pick the same person.
Wow.
But she told me that he not only didn't diagnose with ADHD, he tried to take away this kid's autism diagnosis.
Weird.
Yeah. So I think that he's just a total non-believer.
Yeah. Probably thinks autism is from vaccines or something.
Yeah. Probably something like that.
Yikes.
Yeah. It's super scary, which I didn't know before this week. I was doing some research for one of my kiddos that I work with. But I didn't know that you can actually get your level of autism like changed based on like your period of life or your support needs later on. I didn't know that.
Interesting. I didn't either.
Yeah, but I ran into it off of a couple of reputable sources that were like, maybe you're diagnosed with level 2 support needs as a young kiddo because you're maybe late verbal, not communicating appropriately, that kind of thing. But then maybe, when you're a teenager, now you've caught up kind of in that communication and they may change that level. But
Interesting.
yeah, I didn't know that that was possible.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
But it makes sense in terms of the level describes the amount of support you need. And I do see that in my own experience that has ebb and flowed quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
it
me
makes
too.
sense that you can get it changed.
Right.
It's flexible.
Flexible.
It's fluid.
Fluid like a lot of things. So next up in what happened with mine was I got referred to a group that was not with my insurance, unfortunately. It still wasn't horribly expensive. I don't know how I got so lucky. I think I
Yeah.
paid like 180 for the first one, and then I think I paid around like 600 or 700 for the second one without insurance coverage of it. So really not too bad. I've heard some cases where it was like multiple thousands. Yeah. So yeah, I got referred to this other group. That they were a group of primarily women. And I walked in and I could tell right away it was very different. And actually later at the end of the test, they told me that within like 5 minutes of me walking in and like greeting them and doing all of that, that they were like, yeah,
They clocked you.
yeah, pretty sure. Yeah, totally clocked. Um, that
Oh
and they
my
also told
God.
me at the end that they read his final summary that I read
Ugh.
snippets from. They read
Yeah.
that and they said the same thing that we were talking about. He's literally describing autism characteristics and
Yeah.
then saying no.
It's not autism. It
Yeah.
looks like autism, walks like autism, is not autism.
Exactly.
Yikes.
Yeah. So this is the good report.
Yeah.
I was telling McKenna before this because I was looking for my reports.
Yeah.
And I went through a big like purge of my paper documents to try to get rid of some stuff. And I uploaded everything online. So I've got still the copies online, but I, in a little like self-affirmation moment, shredded the original report for the old one.
It's gone.
It's gone.
It's out.
Got rid of that paper copy. No, thank you.
Hell yes.
But I kept the copy of this one because I like this one.
This one affirms me.
This one affirms me. And also
Yeah.
they listened to me and did real tests.
They didn't gaslight me.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so this one, let's see. A lot of them have similar tests, obviously. Ones that were on this one that were not on the other one were the TOVA test of variables of attention auditory version, advanced clinical solutions social cognition, the MMPI, which Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, a sensory profile, also
Mhm.
not done on the first one, social responsiveness scale, RITVO, Autism Asperger's Diagnostic Scale, which is the
What?
RAS. Oh, wow.
You got tested for autism
Wow.
in an autism
Autism.
assessment?
Yeah. An autism.
An autism?
Yeah, amazing.
That's crazy.
And the Adaptive Behavior Assessment Scale, the ABAS, the brief A self-report. So, oh, it keeps going too. So
Wow, you did a lot.
they did a ton
Damn.
of testing. I
Running
remember the
back.
finger tapping test.
What was the
Forced
finger tapping
choice.
test?
Oh, that one was an interesting one. I'll tell you about it in a
Okay.
minute. They ended up diagnosing me with autism spectrum disorder without cognitive impairment level 1, frontal lobe and executive functioning deficit. So they diagnosed me with executive functioning deficit because at the time I didn't understand ADHD in myself very well and like how it related to autism. So when I was answering the questions, I was answering the questions very autistically and overthinking every single one of them on the
Got it.
ADHD. So like the questions that are like, are you disorganized and have trouble getting things lined up or whatever? And I'd be like, well, no, I have to have everything organized, blah, 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 blah. But it's because I have difficulty arranging it, but then my brain needs
Yeah.
the structure, so then I fix it.
Yep.
Um,
I think it's really hard to get that diagnosis of the combined presentation if you are not educated that you can have both, and also having a little bit of those interoception
mhm.
um, skills to be
Yeah.
able to be like, oh, yes, I do line things up, but before I line them up, it's actually really hard for me to get started lining them up or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or like the distress, like maybe you feel distress
Yes.
at the thought of doing it,
Right.
but then
Like
you,
that.
yeah, exactly. I
Okay.
also wonder, I wonder if for like testers, if you're more likely to get combined diagnosis if you were diagnosed ADHD first,
Mm-hmm.
because that kind of like is, I don't know, it feels like the part that's hard to catch along with it. So if you've already caught that, then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, we're adding on to it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but I got diagnosed with executive functioning deficit, so there's that. Still a generalized anxiety disorder, thanks, and persistent depression disorder, which was not unexpected.
Yay.
Yay! They did include things like difficulty understanding and maintaining social relationships, which has continued into adulthood, difficulty with verbal and nonverbal communication, and a positive history of preference for routine, restricted interests, video games and horses during childhood, and repetitive slash stimming behaviors, finger tapping and arm rubbing, also mouth biting that I've done since I was a child. Due to her neurocognitive pattern of overwhelm for lists, repeating increasingly complex sentences, trouble with sustained attention, and difficulty with simple awareness, she was given a diagnosis of executive functioning deficit. Yeah. Okay, so in my breakdown of, remember where the guy said
Oh, yes.
on the section where he said grossly intact for everything, they've included things like motor and sensory, running into objects, perceptual, confusing left and right, language, difficulty with word finding, difficulty with expressing self, understanding others, difficulty talking clearly and losing train of thought, difficulty paying attention for long periods, easily distracted, feeling as though people talk too fast, frequently asking others to repeat themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all things that make total sense to me now.
They were so thorough. I'm
These
really
people,
impressed.
yeah, were really
Yeah.
much better. And I won't read like all of my results, but there's some that made me laugh because I like scored ridiculously high on some things, which is part of like why some of my things get missed, I think.
Yeah.
My above average in vocabulary and similarity finding. And then where was my really bad one? Let's see. Below average in most of the logical memory tests. So like
Mm.
recalling, and then but a good memory and visual memory, which is interesting.
You must be a visual processor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is my favorite section in the social cognition subtests. I knew when I was doing them that I was doing badly. And I think that
Yeah.
this one was a lot of the ones where they show you pictures of like a face and they ask you what the emotion is associated with
Yeah.
it.
I have a lot of that with speech therapy. Like a lot of
Yeah.
polls are to name the feeling or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So they were asking that, and then like sometimes along with a story of like, what's this person's response or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
All social normative.
yeah, and I scored low average in effect naming, prosody pair matching, which was like matching two people making similar expressions. So I couldn't
Interesting.
match like two
Yeah.
disgusted faces versus two like sad face, like whatever
Yeah.
it was. And then exceptionally low in prosody, which do you know what that definition is?
I do,
You
but
do?
can I like look it up on my
Yes,
phone so I don't fuck it
please,
up?
please.
So, prosody is the part of speech that really looks at your connective speech. So, it looks at rhythm, it looks at pitch, it looks at stress of syllables. You can get more into nitty-gritty, but it could be, you know, we talk about flat affect with autistic folks, and um, like an exciting thing happened, but them having like saying, that was a great movie instead of that was a great movie, and putting
Mm.
more. I'm obviously autistic, and like I struggle really hard with understanding kind of the differences in prosody,
Mm.
but through my like education, I think it's more of just like putting stress on certain words. And like I was saying, it's social expectations, I think, more than anything. So people noticing that you're speaking differently, that you're carrying your language differently, is my general understanding of it.
And that's a good example of kind of what I've read from a lot of people's reports and stuff is that a lot of people think during the test, like, oh, they're testing this aspect through whatever thing I'm doing. But
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that, it's they're watching your responses to what's happening. Like a lot of it is just like a social setup situation and seeing how your physical responses are observed to change.
Yeah.
Um, so even though you don't like think you're doing a certain test, that you are probably doing something that you don't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Having been in like the testing position and the testee
Ooh, yeah.
position, right? And you're just like, oh, I know what you're looking at. Like, I can't mask during this, but like I could mask because I know exactly what to do. So it's just
Yeah.
interesting. Anyway,
Yeah. That's so interesting because like in physical therapy, any of our testing is not that. It's like
yeah,
very blatant. Like, can you squat?
yeah.
Can this baby roll over?
Should
We're
have
not
gone into pieces.
we're
Damn
not
it.
asking. We're not asking how did the baby feel when they rolled over?
Were they able to express they didn't
Yeah.
want to do that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Uh,
So anyways, the finger tapping test that you were asking
yeah, what's
about.
that? I'm
So
so
it
curious.
was literally like a board with a piece of metal, and then you like tapped the top of it,
Okay.
and you were supposed to tap it. I can't remember if it was tapping it as fast as you could. I think it must have been because I was so annoyed at it. I'm very right side dominant, and I like was trying to do it, and like my brain kept like short circuiting. And I literally wrote down in here that she noted this task hurt her brain. And as such is not considered a valid representation of fine motor speed.
That's
I scored
awesome.
exceptionally low on both hands.
It's okay. They're just your hands. So this sounds like an occupational therapy type of assessment.
Yeah, they were looking more at like function and like your connection
Okay.
to fine motor control.
So freaking
Yeah.
cool. Wow.
Yeah, so that was really fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, after this test, I felt much better, and I definitely felt better after they were like, yeah, as soon as you walked in, we kind of had an idea, and like from his description, because I sent it to them ahead of time,
Right.
they were like, yeah, we're pretty sure.
Yeah.
We're pretty sure we know what we're doing here.
I'm so glad that you had that experience after
Yeah.
having the experience you had before. And I'm so glad that you had that experience as an autistic woman and just going into a way more neurodiversity affirming setting,
Yeah.
looking at autism for what it is and not, well, she speaks and she is a an adult who lives independently and
I went to school and did well
yeah,
in school.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such a disservice to folks across all levels because autism is not a bad thing and you are not inherently wrong for being autistic.
Yeah.
And there's just so much ableism that plays into it. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty much been my story since then. I've gotten to know myself a lot more
yeah,
in relation to things. Honestly, diagnosis for me made a world of difference. Because I'm someone coming from my background with family beliefs and of course my own internalized beliefs that, I needed someone else to say, yeah, you have something going on to really truly be like, yeah, I do. I need some help,
yeah,
or like I um can use support needs or that kind of thing. Like before I wouldn't use like headphones in the grocery store or like any of that stuff until I understood like why I was doing that and that it actually was me having a difficulty and not being like I just need to get better at this thing or I need
yeah,
to tolerate this thing more because it's
yes,
a normal thing to tolerate.
yeah.
Um
That's
instead of
what
just being
everyone
like
needs to.
it's okay. It's okay to support yourself and like use tools to help you get through things.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just how you're processing the world
yeah,
and processing it differently than holistic people.
yeah.
There's no shame in it, which I
Mhm.
think
Tell
clearly
that
your
to
first
this.
psychologist
Yeah,
didn't really know
definitely
what he
didn't
was
get
talking
it.
about. So,
For
anyway,
sure.
well, thank you for the very thorough sharing of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I again just really appreciate that you had kind of that dual experience of someone gaslighting you, being really ableist about it, and then going to another team that looked at it very holistically, neurodiversity affirming.
Yeah, I feel really glad that now I can encourage other people to, of
Yeah.
like, your first diagnosis doesn't mean it stops there.
Hmm.
If you don't feel that it was correct or that your doctors don't feel it was correct. Um, and just because somebody's an expert in something doesn't mean that they, you know, actually do the tests that they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Pay attention.
Yeah. That should have been the first red flag.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Fascinating.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of Oddie Hotties. We love talking with you. Please like, subscribe, and share if you're enjoying what we're sharing so far. And keep an eye out for the episode about McKenna's diagnosis process later this month. We appreciate our hotties so much. Hotties out.